Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities.
I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
For weeks, tension simmered behind palace walls, hidden beneath polished smiles and carefully staged appearances. Then suddenly, everything changed. A scandal tied to Queen Camilla didn't just shake public trust, it forced a decision no one expected. King Charles, still wearing the crown, stepped back as Prince William quietly took control, rewriting royal power without a single formal announcement. Insiders whispered, alliances shifted, and the monarchy itself seemed to bend under pressure. But here's what makes this moment truly shocking. Was this a necessary move to save the crown, or the beginning of something far more dangerous? Drop your thoughts below. The scandal that forced a royal standoff. At the moment Prince William stepped into his father's residence, something felt off. No announcement, no protocol. He didn't wait to be received or escorted. He walked in like a man carrying something too urgent to delay. Staff noticed immediately, not just his sudden arrival, but the cold focus in his eyes. He didn't greet anyone. That alone told them this was serious. For weeks, he had been watching a situation grow worse by the day. At the center of it was a scandal that refused to fade, one tied to a disgraced former royal associate whose name had already caused lasting damage to the monarchy. The issue wasn't just the scandal itself, but the fact that Queen Camilla had reportedly continued her private connection with this individual even after the controversy became public. Messages, quiet support, and alleged invitations had painted a troubling picture, one that critics quickly seized upon. To the public, it looked like the palace had learned nothing. When William finally stood before Queen Camilla, her reaction revealed she hadn't expected this confrontation, certainly not in this way. But from her point of view, this wasn't a scandal in the way others described it. The relationship in question had existed long before headlines turned toxic. It was built on years of shared trust, long before she became queen, long before the pressure of the crown reshaped her world. She didn't see herself as defending wrongdoing. She saw herself as refusing to abandon someone simply because the world had turned against them. In her mind, loyalty meant standing firm when things became uncomfortable. She remembered her own past, the years when public opinion had been brutally against her, when every move she made was judged and criticized. Back then, it was the people who didn't walk away that helped her survive. Those memories shaped how she saw the present. So why should she now become the kind of person who walks away when things get difficult? But Prince William wasn't willing to separate emotion from reality. He laid out the facts clearly. The issue wasn't just a past friendship, it was ongoing contact during an active scandal. In a world where every action could be exposed, that kind of connection wasn't harmless. It sent a message, and that message, whether intended or not, suggested tolerance for behavior the public had already condemned. At a time when trust in the monarchy was already fragile, that was a risk he believed they simply couldn't afford. The conversation quickly shifted from one relationship to something much deeper. It became a clash of beliefs. Camilla saw the monarchy as an institution made up of real people, people who still deserved private lives and personal loyalty. William saw it differently. To him, the monarchy was a symbol first, and symbols didn't survive on personal feelings. They survived on public confidence. And right now, that confidence was slipping. Their words grew sharper, their positions harder. Neither one was truly listening anymore. Each believed they were protecting the monarchy, but in completely different ways. Then there was King Charles III. He wasn't present when the confrontation began, but when he was informed, the weight of it hit him immediately. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a divide between his wife and his heir, two people at the very center of his world. And now both stood on opposite sides of a crisis that demanded action. But what action could he take? Supporting Camilla risked appearing indifferent to the scandal. Supporting William risked undermining his own authority and possibly his marriage. Doing nothing wasn't an option either. The tension had already begun to spread beyond private rooms. Staff whispered. Loyalties formed quietly. The palace, usually controlled and composed, was beginning to fracture from within. 3 days later, Prince William returned, and this time he didn't come to argue. He came with a line drawn: cut all ties with anyone connected to the scandal, or he would take the matter beyond the palace walls. It wasn't just a demand, it was a direct challenge, something rarely seen within the royal structure. An heir, stepping forward, forcing the issue into the open. And in that moment, everything shifted. Because this was no longer just about a controversial friendship, it had evolved into something far more serious. A quiet struggle over control, over judgment, and over the very identity of the monarchy itself, all under the watchful eyes of a world that was paying closer attention than ever before. So how did William manage to outmaneuver and unsettle Charles in a moment of such delicate balance? And what hidden forces truly shaped this power shift? Let's break down how control was slowly, and almost imperceptibly, taken and reshaped. The quiet power struggle within the crown. For generations, the system that guided royal power had followed a clear and careful pattern. The monarch ruled, the heir waited. It was simple, structured, and rarely questioned. The future king or queen could advise, prepare, and observe, but never step beyond that invisible line. That balance protected the crown itself, keeping order even during moments of crisis. But that balance did not hold. William made a move no modern heir had dared to make. He did not wait quietly in the background. Instead, he stepped forward and demanded influence over decisions that, by tradition, belonged only to his father. It was not just unexpected, it was unsettling. Those who studied royal tradition were not shocked by what he wanted, but by how he chose to get it. The method broke an unspoken rule that had guided the monarchy for decades. And timing was everything. Behind palace doors, Charles was not as strong as he appeared in public. His schedule had become unpredictable, often interrupted by health struggles that refused to fade. Official appearances still showed confidence, but those closest to him could see the strain. Illness and pressure had taken their toll, quietly weakening his ability to handle prolonged conflict. William saw that. He understood that this was not a moment for patience. It was a moment for action. By presenting his demands when his father was at his lowest energy, he created a situation where resistance would be difficult, even exhausting. It was a calculated risk, and one that revealed just how far he was willing to go. Inside the palace, reactions were divided. Some believed William was doing what needed to be done. The monarchy was under pressure, surrounded by controversy and public doubt. If decisive action was delayed, the damage could become permanent. From this perspective, William was not overstepping. He was protecting the institution before it slipped further into crisis. But others saw danger. To them, this was more than a bold move. It was a line being crossed. If an heir could push past tradition once, what would stop it from happening again? The monarchy depended on clear roles. Blurring those roles risked creating confusion, or worse, instability that could spread far beyond a single decision. Tensions rose quietly, but sharply. William's demand was not open for negotiation. He wanted complete unity within the family, especially when it came to distancing themselves from anyone connected to scandal. There could be no mixed signals, no private loyalties that might later become public problems. Every action had to send the same message. And then came the most difficult part. Camilla's connection placed her directly in the center of the storm. Her position made the situation harder, not easier. If she could not step back in the way William expected, then everything he was trying to build would begin to fall apart before it even had a chance to work. Meanwhile, pressure on Charles kept growing. Public trust in the monarchy was slipping. Conversations that once seemed unthinkable, like stepping aside, were now being discussed more openly. The weight on his shoulders was no longer just personal. It was institutional. Every decision carried consequences that could shape the future of the crown itself. And at the center of it, all stood a father and a son, locked in a quiet but powerful struggle. William made his position clear through logic and foresight. He laid out scenario after scenario, showing how even small compromises could spiral into larger problems. His argument was simple but difficult to ignore. Half measures would solve nothing. Charles listened, and that was the hardest part, because deep down, he knew there was truth in what his son was saying. The monarchy was vulnerable. The risks were real. But accepting William's demands meant something far greater than solving one crisis. It meant changing the balance of power itself. Slowly, almost without anyone announcing it, things began to shift. Decisions once made by the king began to pass through William's hands. Advisors adjusted. Processes changed. No formal declaration was made, but the reality became impossible to ignore. Authority was no longer where it had always been. It had moved, not officially, not publicly, but undeniably. And as that shift settled into place, one question lingered in the shadows, growing heavier with every passing moment. What happens when protecting the crown means surrendering the very power that defines it? Stay tuned. The impossible choice that shattered the crown. King Charles finally reached a point where delay was no longer possible. For weeks, he had tried to postpone a decision that weighed heavily on both his marriage and the stability of the monarchy. He had hoped time would provide a solution that might satisfy both his wife and his son, but that hope faded as pressure mounted. The scandal refused to disappear, public anger grew louder, and Prince William showed no sign of backing down. What once seemed open had narrowed into something rigid and unavoidable. Queen Camilla sensed the change before Charles ever said it out loud. In private conversations, she noticed subtle shifts in his tone, a quiet hesitation replacing his certainty. The strong defense he once offered began to weaken, and small signs turned into a painful realization. He was no longer standing firmly with her, but preparing to prioritize the monarchy over their bond. The critical moment came during a brief private meeting. Charles presented his decision as something forced by circumstances, yet both understood the truth. As king, he still held constitutional authority to reject William's demands. But authority alone was no longer enough. His health was declining, pressure was intense, and William's determination was relentless. Together, these factors made resistance feel impossible. Camilla struggled with this reality. While she understood the reasoning, it did not ease the pain of being set aside. The man who once defied the world to stand by her was now stepping away. In that moment, she asked whether Charles had truly considered refusing William. His response was hesitant, revealing he had tried to avoid disappointing both sides, but William held greater leverage. William's power came from his ability to threaten the monarchy's reputation, while Camilla's influence was limited to personal consequence. This imbalance reshaped decision-making within the palace. There was no ceremony, but authority shifted quietly. Charles withdrew from strategy meetings, and William stepped in, first as participant, then as decision-maker. Advisors adapted quickly, recognizing that preserving the institution mattered more than tradition. Power shifted, even as titles remained unchanged. Camilla found herself increasingly excluded. Decisions were made without her, and conversations continued without her presence. The exclusion built slowly into isolation. Charles reassured himself the changes were temporary, believing things would return to normal. But those inside the palace knew better. Once authority shifts, it rarely returns. William's influence continued to grow as his strategies proved effective in managing the crisis. What began as temporary soon solidified into structure. Camilla's role diminished as courtiers bypassed her. She watched decisions unfold without her involvement, realizing her position had shifted from partnership to distance. Though still queen, her influence had been quietly stripped away. Charles, once the central authority, became more of a symbolic figure. He attended meetings, but decisions were often already made. William now controlled strategy and direction, effectively leading the monarchy's operations. The king's presence increasingly served to confirm decisions rather than shape them. In the end, Charles's choice revealed itself as something less than a true choice. William had positioned the situation so every alternative carried heavy consequences. Supporting his wife risked the monarchy, while supporting the monarchy meant distancing himself from her. Charles chose the crown, preserving the institution but surrendering authority to his son. Camilla watched as the man who once defied the world for her gave way to a reality she could not influence, and in that silence, the palace began to change. And now the crown no longer guarantees control, and the queen who once stood beside the king begins to disappear from the very system she helped sustain. Camilla's power slips away, but is this truly the end of her influence, or just the beginning of something far more unexpected? Keep watching to find out. The silent fall of a queen. King Charles reached a point where delaying the decision was no longer possible. For weeks, he had tried to hold off, hoping time would ease the pressure. and provide a solution that could protect both his marriage and the stability of the monarchy. But that hope faded as the situation grew more intense. The scandal refused to disappear. Public outrage rose, and Prince William showed no sign of backing down. What once felt open had narrowed into something rigid and unavoidable. Camilla noticed the change before Charles acknowledged it. In private, his confidence began to weaken, and certainty gave way to hesitation. The man who once defended their shared position with conviction was no longer doing so. These small signals revealed a truth that became impossible to ignore. Charles was leaning toward protecting the monarchy, even if it meant sacrificing parts of his relationship. The defining moment came during a short private meeting. Charles explained his decision as something forced by circumstances rather than personal choice. Both understood the deeper truth. Despite pressure, Charles still held constitutional authority to reject William's ultimatum. As king, he had the power to choose differently, but having the power and using it were no longer the same. Charles faced multiple pressures at once. His health was declining, scrutiny was intense, and William's determination was unrelenting. These factors made resistance feel impossible. Camilla understood this intellectually, but emotionally, being set aside was deeply painful. The realization that the man who once stood against the world to marry her was now stepping away cut far deeper than expected. During that conversation, Camilla asked whether Charles had truly considered refusing William's demands. Charles struggled to answer. He admitted searching for a way to satisfy both sides, but ultimately recognized William held more leverage. William could threaten the monarchy's reputation, while Camilla's position was only personal. This imbalance made the choice feel already decided. What followed was a quiet shift rather than a formal transfer of power. Charles began withdrawing from key meetings. William stepped into those spaces, first as participant, then as leader. Advisors adapted quickly, knowing stability mattered more than hierarchy. Authority moved, even as titles remained unchanged. Camilla found herself increasingly excluded. Decisions were made without her, and conversations continued without her involvement. This did not happen all at once, but step by step, creating isolation. Charles believed the changes were temporary, but inside the palace, a different reality was clear. Once power shifts, it rarely returns. As William's role expanded, his leadership proved effective. His strategies strengthened his position, and his influence grew into firm control. Charles became more symbolic, attending meetings, but often after decisions were made. His role shifted from directing outcomes to endorsing them. Camilla observed the transformation closely. Her influence diminished, and courtiers who once sought her guidance now bypassed her. She retained her title, but the power and partnership defining her role had slipped away. The marriage that once symbolized unity now existed within a structure where she no longer played an active role. Charles chose to protect the institution, but in doing so, he surrendered the authority that defined his reign. The crown was preserved, but at a cost that reshaped everything around it. But what happens when the crown begins to operate without its king? As power quietly slips into unseen hands and the balance shifts in silence. Could this be the moment the story takes an unexpected turn? Let's uncover how the unofficial reign begins to reshape everything. The silent transfer of power within the crown. William's arrival at Buckingham Palace began early, often before most staff had even started their day. In those quiet hours, he reviewed reports, approved decisions, and handled matters that, by tradition, belonged to his father. Yet these were not ordinary times. The monarchy was under pressure from health concerns and growing public scrutiny, and the system required someone who could act quickly and decisively. Without ceremony or public announcement, William stepped into that role. Behind the scenes, a shift was taking place. Palace staff adjusted quickly, not because rules had changed, but because reality demanded it. They understood that survival depended on recognizing where real power was now concentrated. Slowly but unmistakably, authority began to move from the king to the heir. The changes showed up in the smallest details. Documents that once required the king's approval now carried William's signature. Decisions about official events, diplomatic matters, and state functions were no longer paused for royal input. They were finalized through William's office. What once was a request became an instruction. Those outside the palace noticed as well. Foreign leaders and government officials adapted quickly, engaging with William as the central figure in royal affairs. In practice, he had become the point of contact, while Charles remained in the background. Even in formal discussions, William led, and Charles participated only when tradition required. Inside the palace, longtime advisors found their roles changing. Some were pushed aside, while others were replaced by individuals who aligned more closely with William's vision. The shift was steady and deliberate. The old guard remained, but their influence faded as new systems were put in place. Public appearances made the transformation even clearer. William began taking center stage at events that once belonged to Charles. Speeches, announcements, and engagements shifted toward him, while the king's role became more symbolic. Photographs captured this change naturally. William in front, commanding attention, while Charles stood quietly behind. This pattern extended into finances and operations. Budget decisions, staffing choices, and resource management flowed through William's control. Over time, Charles was informed of decisions rather than involved in making them. Authority followed control over resources rather than titles or tradition. Even sensitive matters, including scandal management, were handled under William's direction. He decided how the family responded to controversy, what messages were released, and how close the royal household remained to certain individuals. His approach emphasized clarity and consistency. What made this shift more powerful was effectiveness. William's energy, focus, and willingness to act quickly gave him an advantage as Charles faced health challenges. In comparison, William's decisiveness made him the natural leader, even without formal recognition. Within the family, William's influence extended further. He shaped decisions about royal roles and relationships, prioritizing the protection of the institution above personal ties. Meanwhile, the palace adapted to this structure. Staff turned to William's team for answers, and his leadership style, firm and direct, contrasted with Charles's slower approach. Efficiency began to outweigh tradition. Catherine's growing role also signaled the future. As she appeared more frequently at key events, the public embraced her and William as the next chapter of the monarchy. Their image strengthened the shift already unfolding. Gradually, international engagements reflected this change. William and Catherine represented the monarchy more often, while Charles and Camilla appeared less frequently. These decisions aligned with the rising influence of the younger generation. Charles, facing health challenges and pressure, chose not to resist. Stepping back allowed the system to continue without open conflict. In time, the transformation became so seamless it almost disappeared. William led as if already king, guiding decisions while still holding the title of heir. Charles remained monarch in name, but real power shifted. Decisions, influence, and control moved quietly. The change unfolded gradually, shaped by necessity, circumstance, and the heir's growing responsibilities. And as this quiet transfer of authority settles into place, one question begins to emerge. Has the line between king and heir been broken before? Could this silent shift in power be something history has already witnessed? Let's delve into the details. The crown in transition. To understand whether the line between king and heir has truly been broken, you have to look back through history, because what feels shocking today has echoes in moments long past. Across different monarchies, there have been times when a reigning king was still on the throne, yet power quietly shifted toward the heir long before the official transfer. One of the clearest examples comes from the long reign of King George III. As his health declined due to what historians believe was a severe mental illness, his son, George IV, stepped in as Prince Regent. While George III technically remained king, he was no longer able to govern effectively. The heir assumed control, making decisions, handling state matters, and acting as the true power behind the crown. This wasn't a formal overthrow, it was a necessity born from incapacity. Yet it created a powerful precedent. When a king cannot rule, the heir often begins to rule in all but name. A similar dynamic unfolded during the final years of Queen Victoria. Though she remained active for much of her reign, her later years were marked by increasing reliance on her heir, Edward VII. Victoria withdrew from public life after the death of Prince Albert, and as her visibility decreased, Edward took on more responsibilities behind the scenes. He became more than just an heir. He became a bridge between tradition and the future, gradually shaping the monarchy, even before he formally ascended the throne. Fast forward to more recent history, and you can see similar patterns though less dramatic. During the later years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, her son, now King Charles III, began taking on an expanded role. As the Queen aged, Charles stepped in to represent the monarchy at key events, attend diplomatic functions, and manage responsibilities that once rested solely on her shoulders. While no scandal or crisis was driving the shift, there was a gradual, almost invisible transfer of influence, one shaped by age, experience, and necessity. What makes these examples important is that they reveal a consistent truth. Monarchy is not always as rigid as it appears. While the Constitution may place all formal power in the hands of the reigning monarch, real power often depends on circumstance. Illness, public pressure, political tension, or internal crisis can all create openings where the heir begins to step forward, not through rebellion, but through expectation. In the case of the current monarchy, the dynamic becomes even more complex. Unlike past transitions that were primarily driven by health or age, this situation introduces an additional factor: public perception. Modern monarchy operates under intense scrutiny, where every decision is analyzed, and every relationship can become a liability. That means influence is not only about who holds the title, but who holds the trust of the public. And this is where history becomes especially relevant. The heirs who gained power early in the past did so because they were seen as necessary. They stepped in not to challenge the crown, but to protect it. But necessity and overreach are separated by a very thin line. When an heir begins to act with authority before their time, it raises a difficult question. Are they preserving the monarchy or quietly reshaping it? So when we look at the current situation, it doesn't exist in isolation. It fits into a long tradition of moments where the crown remained in one hand, while power slowly shifted to another. The only difference now is that the world is watching more closely than ever. So, what is your take on the king granting power to William? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.